Welcome to the Snap, Crackle and Pod podcast. Today, we welcome our very own head of IT, Mohammed Din. Mohammed, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I started my career many years ago, like most did, in support, in a help desk role in a school, which was fun and games. Everything with a plug on was IT, was me. But I picked up a lot of exposure to a lot of different technology stacks, which was nice. And from there, I started to move through the support positions, more kind of senior support, team lead. But then I started to vary my career a little bit. So I had a stint in sales, which was new business, and then kind of did the natural progression from sales into customer success management. And then after that, also project management, which was a nice stint too, before eventually I settled into senior leadership roles, mostly in managed services and within the IT sector. And I've been there ever since. Been with Snap now for a couple of months. Feels like it's been a lot longer. But yeah, excited to be here.
Fantastic. And yeah, great to have you on the team. And I know you're doing a lot of fantastic work for us already. And I also started my career in support. So, I think the great thing about that grounding is that you get all of the big challenges thrown at you, the stuff that other people can't solve. So it's quite a steep learning curve. So
absolutely.
I was out in India with the team recently talking to them about my early years in a support team. So we definitely got that common ground there. So one of the big topics right now is cybersecurity. Has been some recent events that have happened. Talk to me a little bit about information security and why it is so important.
So I think information security in general for Snap Analytics is a huge priority right now. The short answer is it's important because we owe it to our clients. We're a service provider. We're in the data sector. Clients entrust us with their most valuable data on a daily basis. And I think if we delve a bit more into information security, I think we can kind of summarize it as being safeguarding three principles, which is the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of data. So if we delve a little bit deeper into why that's important, the first one is the integrity of the data. Our clients need to feel assured that their data is accurate, consistent, and trustworthy. If it isn't, it can lead to some real kind of issues, financial loss, reputational damage. In some critical sectors like the healthcare sector, it can result in death. It can, in the financial sector, it can result in destabilizing markets. It's a huge kind of priority for us. Aside from that, they also should feel confident that their sensitive data is kept confidential. We all know how important that is. Confidentiality breaches are disastrous for organizations. We also need to be concerned with protecting individual rights to privacy. And so it's key that we look at confidentiality as a key tenet when we look at information security. I also want to talk a little bit around data availability. We're in a time now when the vast majority of companies are data-driven, and they use their data to make huge business decisions. And therefore, that key data needs to be available, ready to be served up when it's needed. So those are the three kind of tenets that I think we need to consider. But information security is a lot more than just technical controls and perimeter defenses and things like that. It's much more about maintaining a security posture that's right-sized for your company. And by right-sized, I mean it's put in place in a way that makes people want to follow the security practices and makes people want to follow best practice when it comes to engineering and things like that. So I think it's a lot more important to see InfoSec as a mindset rather than a series of technical controls. as such.
I think it's all about balance, isn't it? And it's really important to I guess weigh up the demand for kind of accessibility of data. There is much more demand. I think AI is only going to fuel more and more demand going forward. But I think on the other side, you have to ensure that is well governed, well organized, and well managed. How do you find that balance between, I guess, security and accessibility of data?
So I think the easiest mantra to kind of look at when we balance security and accessibility is you want to right-size the security measures so that there's enough security that makes sense for what you're doing at the time. So one of the big mistakes that I've seen made is people kind of got overboard with the technical control side of things. So they'll go and procure the best enterprise security system that's available on the market. They'll go and procure enterprise firewalls. But what tends to happen with those things is that those overzealous security measures tend to be skirted. We'll talk a little bit later on about insider threats, but one of the biggest issues that we've got with things like social engineering is that your people are often able to bypass the security that you put in one way or the other to balance that security accessibility kind of equation. So when you're overzealous with what you put in from a security measure, what actually happens is that people skirt the measures, and so you would have been better off implementing something that was a little less overbearing and have people follow it rather than having something that's more and people don't, if that makes sense. So
it's really interesting, isn't it? I think the business and sort of end users will find a way, right? And there's no system that you can put in proof that is absolutely foolproof, I guess. And I was talking to the CIO of one of our big CPG clients recently, and I said, what is it that what's your number one? What keeps you awake at night? And he said it's cybersecurity. He said, because look, I can get the company to a 90% resilience, but I'm never going to get the company to 100% resilience because the threats are constantly changing. They're constantly evolving. So how if you were a CIO of a big global organization, what steps would you be taking to kind of ensure that your data is safe and secure?
I think what you mentioned was interesting, right? Because it speaks to a lot about the mindset around security. I'm of the belief that we shouldn't be aiming for the 100% because it's not tenable. It's impossible to reach that 100th percentile, right? I think instead what we should be looking at is following 5 kind of key steps. So this is my position. I think it starts with having an intimate knowledge of your business, of your processes. And this is often where people start with information security. They start to look at a discovery phase of what do we have in place, what processes do we have in place, where is information stored, etc. And they kind of get a picture of that from looking at policies, from looking at processes, from speaking to department heads to get a kind of a lay of the land and define that as a reality. But the key step that most people miss is looking to see how much adoption and adherence we actually have to those processes. Because it's all well and good us saying, okay, we have X, Y, and Z process that's very operationally effective and very secure, but it's not much use if 50% of the people don't follow it. So I think the first step is really getting down on the ground with the people in the business and understanding, A, what should be happening, but also B, what is actually happening. And you need to do that in a way where people don't feel scrutinized for what they're doing, so that they are transparent and tell you, I'm not following X process because of X, Y, and Z. It's overzealous, it's too overbearing, it's not accessible enough. I think that first step is important because, like we mentioned before, the more overzealous you make the process, the lower adoption you have of it.
How many people have really genuinely read that 100-page IT security policy, right?
Exactly that. So in my head, if we're talking about IT security policies, for me, a short 1 to 2 page policy that covers our main points and then has links out to other more in-depth policies works a lot better than presenting someone with a 40-page document of this is how we do IT at Snap. they're just not going to ingest it. It's not going to, come into practice. I think the second step after understanding what reality looks like within the business is to understand your risks. The most common issue that I see with people performing this process is they'll find out the lay of the land, and then they almost view security as almost a pricing war, or the more expensive something is, the better it works, right? So a good example is I've worked with companies before that invest in really top tier enterprise level firewalls, but they don't perform any user training, and therefore people skirt the firewalls, right? Or give access where they shouldn't give access and things like that. So I think understanding the risks is key, because you need to keep in mind, what are we trying to do here? We're not trying to compete with other companies for who's the most secure. We're trying to secure what we've got going on. So we should understand our risks intimately, because our risks are going to be very different from another company that's a similar size to us. It depends on your industry, depends on your sector, depends on the verticals you work with, the customers you work with. So understanding those risks is key, and defining them somewhere as step 2. Step 3 for me is then forming a right-sized security posture around those risks. So we should look at mitigation for those risks. We should look at which things should be mitigated as a priority. We should look at things that are nice to haves. Some innovation, some improvement that we can make along the way. All of these things should be captured, but we should form a security posture, i.e. we can accept particular risks. Particular risks can be mitigated and still have residual risk. Other risks we can mitigate totally, right? And we should have a good idea of what that looks like. The fourth step for me would be around implementing policies and controls. Again, this is a big stumbling block, because we can police processes in either way. We can put in a technical control that takes the control away from people and they can't skirt the process, or we can put into place a policy where we ask people, you should be doing this and you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z. They're both effective in their own ways. A good example would be, instead of having a firewall that has block lists of 10,000 websites that you don't want people to access, and then every time another website comes up, we add it to a block list. Instead, we write a policy to say, hey, while you're at work, don't do this, don't access these things. That seems to be much more effective, because you extend a level of trust to the user to say, this is what we should be doing, this is what's sensible, don't do that. And then we can police with some minor controls around the perimeter to say, okay, some things which are extreme, we'll block them completely, but we trust you to make the right decisions around the rest. And the last step, which I think is the biggest, most important step out of all of this, is to test, and test again. That reality that we defined in step 1 is a fast-changing reality. It takes one process to change to have a knock-on effect on other processes, which completely change the reality we defined in step 1. So this should be a continuous exercise. The pursuit of securing information is not a checkbox of, we are now 100% compliant, tick, and we put it away. It needs to be a mindset when we design business processes. It should be a tenet of when we try to execute.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the tick box piece is an interesting comment, because, I guess, rewind a couple of years, and for me it was, okay, we're doing cyber essentials because we have to tick these procurement boxes. I think my mindset shifted enormously over the last 2 or 3 years, that ultimately we are, we are the stewards almost of our clients' most sensitive information. And actually the risk for us as a business, reputationally, commercially, is enormous. It's our biggest, risk. And therefore, these processes and these certifications that we're going for are actually about building resilience into the business. And as you say, it's not just about processes and policies. It's also that human firewall, right? It's the biggest firewall of all, because it's ultimately, if you look at most of the breaches that happen, it's people doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing. So I think that training and the human element is really, really critical. So in terms of those kind of steps that you outline, is there a particular sort of methodology, certification that you can talk around that you would kind of recommend in organizations to kind of get started and protect your data and make your organization more resilient?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to considering information security and defining your posture, it is useful to have some framework to work around, right? So Cyber Essentials, you mentioned the Cyber Essentials Plus, they're good starting points for kind of defining that baseline of information security. So, they'll cover things like firewalls, access control, password management, those sort of things. But also ISO 27001 provides a really good foundation for managing information security as an evolving organisation, right? The one caveat that I would say with both of these frameworks is that they are just that. They are frameworks, right? And so like you mentioned, people almost view both of those as tick boxes too, in the idea of if we're ISO 27001 certified and we have our Cyber Essentials Plus, then it means we've got a great security posture and we can kind of park that off and focus on other things. They were never designed to replace right-sizing information security. They were designed as a way to explore and to establish a baseline, and also to provide a framework for you to be able to assess it constantly, which is what we should be doing. And I think if we look at what successful management of information security looks like, I think it's a case of if you're well aware of the risks that you're facing and you've mitigated to a place where we're happy with how we've mitigated, we've been successful in securing information, right? And that looks very different from each company. The information security of a small mum and pop shop is going to be very different to the information security of a huge conglomerate, just by design. But that doesn't mean that one has a better information security posture than the other, because if the mum and pop shop has considered all risks and mitigated, there's a conversation to be had there, right? So those frameworks are fantastic with making you aligned with legal regulations, complying with GDPR, complying with EU laws, but they're not intended to be a resolution to the InfoSec problem. They're kind of guides to move you along. So I think for most companies, look for that Cyber Essentials, get that baseline established. It will cover the basic things that you need to cover, and then look to take that ISO on, because throughout the ISO journey, you will learn that ISO 27001 is very different for each company, and the guidance that you'll pick up from that standard and applying those measures will help you along that journey of monitoring and managing your InfoSec.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it's a good point, isn't it, that it's constantly evolving and changing. This isn't tick the box and you're done. Yeah. I think the frameworks are changing and evolving each year. I think your organisation, your business, particularly at Snap, as you know, we're changing very, very rapidly, right? We're working with new clients. We're increasing headcount. The technology landscape is changing. The tools and technologies we're using are changing. So it's rapidly evolving, and it is something that needs to be almost an always-on framework, right? You're constantly having to loop back and revisit what those threats and what those risks are. So I guess that's maybe a good segue onto the next kind of topic around threats. What are the most common threats that you see across organizations, and how do we mitigate those? I know we've spoken about some of those frameworks, which obviously goes to some of that, but are there any specific threats that you would say are particularly relevant right now?
Yeah, one that hasn't changed across the ages is phishing. It's still very prevalent. I believe as of 2024, around 70% of user access kind of based attacks were performed by phishing in the first instance. Wow. So if we take a look at what phishing is, we can kind of divide it into two parts. We have your average phishing, which is, as the title suggests, a net being cast out to thousands or hundreds of thousands of email addresses with the hope that someone responds to start to take you through that process. But we've also seen a rise in what's called spear phishing, which is targeted phishing. So as an example of both, phishing email is going to be your typical, there's a prince that's looking to get rid of his inheritance, and he wants you to make the transfer for him. There's no personal details included in the email. You can spot all of the spelling mistakes, the grammar mistakes, and you can tell that it's just been a bulk send. spear phishing would be much more targeted, so it may include your company name, it may include your name, it may include some intimate details around the company that will make you think it's genuine. The most common spear phishing ones are the emails that we sometimes receive saying, "Hey, it's Dave, send me a WhatsApp."
There's the classic CEO, I need you to go and buy 100 Amazon
yes, exactly that.
gift cards and send me the codes. Yeah,
exactly
we
that.
see a lot of that.
So I think my personal view is that the best way to reduce the success of phishing isn't through tooling. Don't get me wrong, the inbuilt phishing filters in Outlook, for example, are fantastic at picking out most phishing. But really, you need to train your users to be able to recognize the phishing, because then the perimeter defenses don't matter as much because it's easily identifiable, right? So a good regular training program is going to be really beneficial to cutting the success rate of those phishing attacks. The other one that I see quite a lot of, and you will have seen a lot of in the media, is ransomware. The typical malware injection requiring payment in crypto, not really knowing whether your data is going to be unencrypted or what the nature of the ransomware is. Most times the ransomware isn't actually even encrypting the data, it's actually just deleting it and hoping that you pay in the desperate hope of you being able to decrypt your data. But this seems to be a big one. You probably would have seen some time ago the WannaCry and the other attacks that happened. This is one that is quite easily resolved with good tooling. So a good kind of EDR system like Sentinel-1, for example, will take care of those threats very effectively. But again, the training also is invaluable here. It's surprising, but it's usually the common sense things that people miss. We have this issue of when we work in technical roles, we kind of assume the baseline technical knowledge of other people. And sometimes people don't have roles that involve technology to that degree. So for me and you, it would be crazy to open an executable file that we don't know what it does. But for them, that may be very innocent. It may be trying to open a file that they thought they was going to receive, right? So that basic training on almost how to be safe online and best practice to follow is a good way to mitigate against ransomware.
And it can be actually quite interesting looking at the profile of people that do open those. It's not always the people that you would expect, right? So we use KnowBe4 as a platform. We do phishing simulations. And actually, when you look at the reports, sometimes there are senior people, they might be out and about on the move. Yep. They may get a purchase order, and it's a PDF, and they think, okay, I'm expecting one of those. Yep. So I click on it. Actually, it's not what I expect. Fortunately, we pick those things up a lot of the time in the simulations, but it's surprising. These things can be really quite convincing, and I think simulations are great. Again, they're not foolproof, right? Because if you are out on the move, you're expecting that email to come through with a specific invoice or purchase order or whatever it might be. It's very easily done. So I think constantly, again, it's not a one-off, we'll do the training and then that's it. It's constantly reminding people that look, these threats are ongoing, they're evolving, and we constantly need to remain vigilant. So one of the other areas I think that is commonly exploited, I guess, is social engineering. So talk to us a little bit about that idea.
So most of you will have heard of social engineering as being quite a nefarious, maliciously intended kind of process of extracting information. Social engineering in itself is actually quite a broad topic, but a good definition for it would be it's just the manipulation of social interactions in order to achieve an outcome. And it's not always nefarious, right? Marketing leverages social engineering in a lot of aspects. It plays on that human psychology. It works on those predefined patterns that we all have. And that's an example of where it's not maliciously intended, it's not nefarious, but it still achieves the outcome. When we talk about social engineering now, the reason why social engineering is so prevalent is technology has come, leaps and bounds in the last decade. And perimeter defenses like firewalls, like the email filters, like everything else are evolving, and it's becoming more and more difficult to breach them. So bad actors who are looking for information have decided to pick up what they call human hacking. It doesn't make sense trying to develop software or write code that's going to breach enterprise firewalls and take years doing it when you have access to a person that can, for want of a better phrase, turn the firewall off. And so therefore, humans become a much more attractive target for people looking to extract information. The way that social engineering works, it's based on a few premises. One of the premises is that it's normally a calculated attempt that is spread across many weeks and months. And the idea is to build enough rapport to gather enough publicly available information to make it seem like you have insider information about a company. So a good example of this would be there was a case in New York, I believe, where a dentist's office was operating within a block, and they received a call one day. The receptionist received a call from a guy who was in another dentist's office just down the road, and they said, "Hey, we've just moved onto the block. We just wanted to say hi. We're both dentists. Maybe we can help each other out. My name's so-and-so. Just saying hi." And that was it. That was a call. So the receptionist took it as, that was friendly. Oh, that's Joe from down the road. Hi, my name's Lisa. Fantastic. And nothing happened. And then every week they'd get another call, and it would just be something quite benign on, "Hey, do you mind if we park outside your building today?" "Yeah, sure, absolutely, no problem." And again, slowly that built a relationship. And the idea of the attack in the end was to say, "Hey, we're really struggling with our IT company. They're not doing what we need them to do. Do you have any recommendations?" And that seems like quite an innocent thing to ask, especially with someone who's just down the road. And so she said, "Yeah, we use X, Y, and Z MSP." And he said, "Oh, thanks. Well, I'll look them up. Thank you." And that's where it started, right? So the call the next day came, "Hey, I'm calling from X, Y, and Z MSP. We're your MSP. We need to come in and do some maintenance on your servers. We're going to be rocking up tomorrow." Fantastic, no problem. And that's where the breach happens, right? Wow. But it's the fact of, if you gather enough benign information, you can aggregate that information to make it look like you really know what you're talking about and you are who you say you are. And so that's how these attacks often happen. Now, in today's age, the most common way of doing this I've seen is via LinkedIn, which is where people create profiles of sales development reps for reputable companies, and they will do exactly the same thing. I'll just receive the message of, "Hey, Mohammed, I'm so-and-so, just to introduce myself, just wanted to be part of your network." And for everyone else, we'll say, "Oh yeah, fine, I want to grow my network, we'll let you stay," kind of thing. And then it will be a little bit more and a little bit more, trying to extract tiny bits of information. But in the end, that will be turned around to an email to someone like yourself or someone within a company saying, "Hey, I'm Mohammed. Remember I did X, Y, and Z last week for you. I need this." And that's how that kind of works.
It's interesting, isn't it? And you can see how those kind of actions can, sometimes sway even senior people in an organization. Yeah. So I think, again, that is where really understanding the policies, because actually they do help to protect Absolutely. Against those. And that's where the 400-page policy isn't useful. It's like, look, these are the 20 things you really, really need to be aware of. Yeah. And understand, if somebody comes in claiming to be from the IT company, call the IT company, make sure you've got a key contact, you've got their phone number, Yep. That's their phone number, validate whether that is the person you're talking to. But no, it's a really interesting story, isn't it? And definitely something we all need to be very, very mindful of, as you say, technology is getting increasingly better. But I also think there will be this sort of battle of the AIs from a data security, data privacy perspective, because as AI gets more intelligent, there'll be good actors Absolutely. And there'll be bad actors, right? But these breaches will be able to happen at a much bigger scale.
100%.
Maybe AI can start to socially engineer some of these situations, even to the extent of making those calls and gathering information at massive scale. Now, hopefully on the other side, it's the good and evil, right? Hopefully
Absolutely.
on the good side, AI can also help to detect some of these things. I don't know if you saw I'm trying to think, it was O2 have created an AI granny for hoax callers. Did you see that?
Yes.
So where a hoax caller, they'll automatically put through spam calls to Doreen or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what her name was. And Doreen will try to keep them on the line as long as possible and deliberately waste their time.
Absolutely.
So whilst they're doing that, they're not scamming other people. So it's going to be a real interesting time, and sort of how AI influences the security landscape, I think, for good and for bad.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the other thing to bear in mind with social engineering is there's a misconception that people in my position are not susceptible to it. That's absolutely not true. If you look a bit deeper into the methods that social engineers deploy, the addition of pressure into a situation, the addition of time, the credentials, the wanting to be valued by the CEO, kind of that they exploit these relationships in such a way that anyone can get caught at the wrong time, right? Because as much as I've been doing this 15 years now. I've seen my fair share of social engineering attempts. But I'm not saying there isn't a situation where if it was just the right circumstances with just the right people, that there's a risk there. So it's important to have the tooling in place that can recognise it on a machine level, but to always remain vigilant, always scrutinise things. I think we as humans have this need to not want to be a pain, right? And that is a downfall with social engineering. I don't want to be the guy that stops this call because something's not looking right, but I'm going to be because it doesn't look right, right? So I think once people adopt that mindset of I'm not being a pain, I'm trying to protect the company, that's where real change happens, because you're not scared to hold your hand up and say, hey, this doesn't look right, I just want to call it out. And we should encourage people to do that, I think.
Yeah, and I guess that, again, it's not just technology, it's people. It's also, I guess, underpinned by your culture, right?
Yes, absolutely.
There is, we are never going to criticize anyone for checking and double checking and triple checking, right?
Yep.
So no, that's fascinating area. So I think as we've talked about, this is such a key topic for us, for our customers right now. It's been a really good conversation, Mohammed. I like to finish on a bit more of a light-hearted kind of fun topic. So can you tell us something about you that people might not know?
Sure. So in a previous role, I won't say which, we actually offered a service which was social engineering as a service. And so it was my job to go and visit clients unannounced and see how much information I could gather. And I'll give you a very scary statistic. My time to breach, which meant I had access to some sensitive information which I shouldn't have, on average for small to mid-sized companies, was around about 5 minutes.
Wow.
And that was with no insider knowledge. So one particular customer, I wanted to kind of prove a point because they felt they didn't really need the service, and I was adamant that they did. So what I did was I went onto Amazon and bought myself a BT high-vis. And all jokes aside, I turned up at the building with my high-vis, said, I'm here to perform works on your internet. That was the exact line. And they said, here's a server room. And I plugged my laptop directly into the router and took everything.
Wow.
And that was very common. Some of the breaches I didn't even need to. The most interesting one was a good play in psychology, which was there was a particular customer that had a fairly secure premises, and the CEO of that company wanted me to actually physically breach the office because he believed it was impossible. And so I racked my brains, and what I actually ended up doing was I walked around the building and noticed that outside one of the fire exits there were cigarette butts on the floor. So I bought myself a pack of cigarettes and took a cigarette out, didn't light it, and just stood there and waited. Someone inevitably came down. As soon as I heard someone open the door, I lit the cigarette. The person lit their cigarette. I timed it so I finished at the same time as them. And as I finished, they assumed I'd walked out of the building, so they held the door open for me.
Wow.
And we went in. So these sort of things happen.
What a fascinating role. You're like the mystery shopper for cybersecurity. No, well, yeah. Wow. What an interesting role. I'd imagine that there was quite nerve-wracking at times as well, having to play that role. So you must your acting skills must be pretty good. Fantastic. Well, Mohammed, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for your time.
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Snap, Crackle and Pod podcast. Please click this button to subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow us on all major podcast platforms. We're Snap Analytics. We help organizations make sense of data. If you want to find out more, you can go to www.snapanalytics.co.uk. Thank you.